Hello again, everyone. Just as a reminder, I'd like to do a video like this, the one you saw last week, every single week on a new unit. Hopefully to answer just a few questions that might arise as you go into new stuff, like we talked about keyboard last week, and this week you will be learning about how to place notes on a staff. So before I get into specifically that content, just let me remind you to take full advantage of the different tools that OnMusic provides for you. For example, I've been perusing through the website a little bit this week, and I found lots of interesting things like keywords. It takes all those new terms, which I'm sure for some of you might be, all of them are new, but it's nice to go back and review and maybe keep yourself a list. And honestly, it takes care of the list for you. So let me encourage you to take care of that and just take a look if you want to review some definitions. Also, there is the Video Center that has different videos that borrow from YouTube and other places. So again, I'm personally one of those people that if I see click this, click that, click this, I go to town on it. And as far as I know, most of the stuff you download on this doesn't require any website cookies or anything that might sit on your computer. So in case I haven't stressed this enough, download as much as you can and review as much as possible. You can never overdo it. Okay. So that's just my first little tidbit to you, is to go over all this. So talking about the staff, I don't want to sound like a broken record because I know it talks about this particular unit quite at length. And so I'm just going to focus on a couple of basic stuff. So for example, we already learned, hopefully you've already learned by now, the types of clefs on the staff. And essentially what a clef does is it just maps notes and pitches on a staff. So OnMusic talks about the staff. Hopefully you can see this on my iPad here. It talks about the idea of a staff having 5 horizontal parallel lines with 4 spaces in between. Now, of course, all this tells us is that we're able to take all pitches that we see or hear and rank them from high to low in a visual sense. So while it tells us which direction it goes, it can't necessarily tell us all the pitches. Oh, hello, New York Times. The treble clef, for example, maps a certain range of specific pitches and puts pitches on lines and layers on spaces. So if I'm looking at treble clef, also known as the G clef, this clef refers to E, G, B, D, and F on the line, and F, A, C, and E on the space. And it talks about soon enough later, about learning what are called mnemonic devices, which is just a usually humorous way to remember it, which of course it mentions the very popular example for lines, every good boy does fine on the line, and FACE, face in the space. Now, before I move on to the bass clef and talk about that, those of you who are, maybe you like the kinesthetic versions of learning mnemonic devices, one way that I like to do this to teach with different students, whether it's elementary school, all ages, it works. If we were to take your hand and take all 5 fingers, putting it out sideways, with the thumb facing up, hopefully you'll notice something. How many fingers do I have? 5. And how many spaces are in between each of these fingers up to the thumb? 4. So whether you knew this or not, your hand is a physical example of a staff that you have right in front of you. So check it out. You probably don't even need the manuscript paper right yet to remember lines and spaces. So if I were to hold out my hand in front of me, and I start with the pinky, representing the bottom line of the staff, work my way up to the top, I could ask myself, what notes go with treble clef? Using my hand, I can go from pinky, E, G, B, D, F. Every good boy does fine on the line. I like to add on the line because it helps reinforce. In the same way, what goes in the space? F, A, C, E, face in the space. Okay? Now, of course, you don't necessarily have to use, for every good boy does fine, that particular mnemonic device. The cool thing about mnemonic devices is that you can use whatever you want. If you come up with something even more clever, like, for example, I even had a student that I taught this to in the past, and the student insisted, and it's like, okay, well, why does it have to be boys? So a more gender neutral version she came up with herself was every good bat deserves fudge. Works, the same device. So Just a disclaimer there. It doesn't necessarily have to be that. If you prefer something else, you can use that. Okay, now moving on to bass clef. It talks about the mnemonic device sort of briefly, talking about on the lines we have G, B, D, F, and A, and then on the spaces A, C, E, and G. Now the mnemonic device, if we use the hand to help us remember, works the same way no matter what clef I'm using. So from pinky working my way up to the thumb, G, B, D, F, A. I can go G, B, D, F, A on the line. Or for those of you who live on campus and this is your favorite place to eat, this will be particularly memorable for you if you're a Chipotle fan. Good burritos don't fall apart. GBDFA. Okay? I found that one works really well. For the spaces, A, C, E, G, or all cows eat grass. You can use whatever mnemonic device you wish there. But I really, really love teaching it this way because anytime you forget, you don't have to grab a pencil. You don't have to look it up on Google. Remember it enough and just touch your way through it and you can figure it out. Okay, so that's my biggest tip I want to give to you on remembering pitches, especially when it's some note on the staff. Okay, let's talk about ledger lines. Again, it mentions on Music Fundamentals that ledger lines are simply there to assist us to extend notes beyond the range of what the staff shows. So in case you haven't figured out by now, not all pitches in the world have to exist within the staff. In fact, a lot of music that you see in classical settings or any kind of printed music at some point is going to show notes that look like they didn't quite fit. They're going to have to go a little bit above or maybe significantly above or below, depending on the range of the instrument. So one of the things I want you to see about the nature of the ledger line is that it's just as parallel to lines on the staff. The difference is that you're most likely going to draw them yourself or the program's going to add on to it. So for example, if I were to draw, let me use my iPad here just to kind of show you. I want you to focus on the notes that I highlighted in red. So you can see the last three here. Notice that I already highlighted the G, the last black note. And then my last note on the line is obviously an A. But the first red note that I highlight here is just above the staff, right? But because it's attached to the line below, I don't have to draw a ledger line just yet. So this note, by the way, is just called a B natural above the staff and bass clef. So if you need to remember that, it's just B. You'll notice that all notes moving up the staff move in alphabetical order, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, so you can always just follow that pattern. It's never going to change if you move from space to line, line to space, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, so that would be B. The minute I go above this note is when I have to start considering ledger lines. So each time I move up to a new line, theoretical line, I have to draw that in the form of a ledger line. So I'm only going to draw one. And then the next note above that, this last note right here, is what we would call D. Again, notice that I didn't draw a new ledger line yet. The biggest question I usually get from teaching this is that, well, why can't you just add another ledger line? I can't add another ledger line until I absolutely have to get to a line. So this would be a D on the end, but then once I have to move up to another line, again, it's not there. So guess what? We have to draw another one. So I'm going to add one more ledger line, like so. And then now we have a new note, which is E, with two ledger lines above the staff and bass clef. Okay. Let me encourage you to practice this on your own. You'll notice that on Music Fundamentals, it provides you with a notation practice sheet, and it says to print it out. Go ahead and do that. Or if you have an option, if you're using it on an iPad and you're downloading it that way, and you want to mark it with your pen, whatever. Use whatever you can to practice that. I find with ledger lines, it's a lot easier to test it yourself versus just kind of having to see it the first time. Okay, so that's all ledger lines are doing, is just extending beyond the staff of what we know. All right, the same thing works in descending direction. You would just add the ledger line using the same rule. Okay, if you have any more questions on that, and it doesn't go beyond the extent of this, then you know what to do. You can always look it up. You can ask questions, and I'd love to clarify as much as I can. But again, I think on this particular unit, the program is quite clear on that. Okay. The last thing I want to talk about is the grand staff and middle C. Grand staff is simply taking the treble clef and the bass clef and connecting them together on two staves, which is the plural form for staff. So what makes this unique is that I'm connecting these with what's called a bracket. So I just draw a curve here. You can draw it with the finger and then connects them together. The most common instrument that you'll see a grand staff being played is on a grand piano, appropriately enough, having grand as the adjective. And the reason being is that a grand staff is usually only needed for an instrument that covers a variety of ranges. And the piano can do just that with 88 keys. So from the grand staff, visually, we can sort of understand why middle C gets its name. If you look toward the middle, think of middle C as the connecting point between the two staves. And by that, I mean, before you knew this was called middle C in the treble clef, you most likely learned that this was C4, or C in the fourth octave. But then you also learned in the bass clef that this C was also C4. So this is kind of a revelation we have here in the two staves. Both of these Cs, even though they look different in different positions, they're the same note. So what just happened here is that we crossed a threshold from one range of a clef into a new one. So right smack dab in the middle, where this changes, happens to be on C4. So hence why we get the name middle C, because it's the middle or the bridge that connects these two ranges. Okay. Now some people like to see a little bit easier. The problem is because of these stabs are so far apart, people think, oh, well, can't we just put it like right in the middle in this format? Well, not exactly, because you have to leave plenty of room for extra ledger lines, and it just simply won't work out. You'll get a lot of mess when writing. But for now, just know that C4 is an important connecting point between these two. Middle C and treble clef is going to be one ledger line below, and bass clef, middle C, is going to be one ledger line above the staff and bass. Okay, they're the same note, but they're just going to look slightly different in the clef. All right, so if you learn anything from me in this class in regards to pitch and the keyboard, middle C is the same thing as C4. C4 is the same as middle C. That is incredibly important. When you move on and you have to do pitch notification, it is your home base. So hold on to that knowledge, and let me encourage you as a concluding note that to practice with the piano often. Just because we moved on the keyboard doesn't mean you're done with music from that point on. We just say, okay, you can put that away. Using the piano for any new concept that you learn, especially with regard to pitch, I think you're going to find is very helpful. So whatever that means, using the keyboard app, using your own piano, which would be even better because you can put your fingers on it and feel your way around. Let me encourage you to keep using that and testing out this new knowledge for reading notes and note notification for when we get into harder material. You're going to find that very useful. Okay, so that's all I have for now. If you have any more questions at any point as you start to go through this program, please feel free to send me an email and I will try to clarify as best as I can. Reminder that I do not have the quiz as part of the assigned for homework 4. That was on purpose. Unless you're feeling pretty good and want to take it now, then sure. But otherwise, it's not required for this week. This is just your chance to get used to this new concept, and then I'll add it to next week's assignment. Great. So if there's nothing else, then for now, I will say so long, and I will post a new video next week. Take care.